I want to touch a little bit about the wolf introduction in 95 and what really happened. What happened with the wolf introduction in 95 and what did it do to the elk herd? So the Greater Yellowstone elk herd, some people say it was 22,000, 18,000, somewhere around 20,000 in that 1994-1995 timeframe when they reintroduced the wolf. Just as quick, 8 years later, just as quick to 2003, that number of the Greater Yellowstone herd was down to 4,000 and it dipped all the way down to 2,000 shortly thereafter. So here's the big thing. You'll see the trophic cascade view of the wolf and why it was important to introduce the wolf into Yellowstone, and that is specifically this, that there were so many elk in Yellowstone that they were browsing down all the willows, and the willows were gone, and so the beavers left. And so you'll see, whether it's Nat Geo or wherever you'll see it, you'll see that because of the wolf, they brought back the beaver and they made the landscape healthier. And that's just simply not true. And finally, there's been some studies that have come out about that in particular. And I really wanted to talk about that really quick. But Dan McNulty, so he's an ecologist at the Utah State University. He says it's a really romantic story, but it's a story about a world that doesn't really exist. And so what really happened though? So why did they say this? Not only did they want to say this about the wolf to gain favor in the public eye and public support, and you can go on any page on social media and argue with somebody about the wolf and they still believe this, because there's a video on YouTube about the trophic cascade, and 40 million views. So it's kind of like a worldwide knowledge now. It's actually misinformation, in my opinion specifically, a harsh amount of misinformation. But what really happened was that, number one, elk, they're grazers. And when they do browse, say aspen and willows, it's in the wintertime and they're gonna browse. But this isn't really like winter area, like in the Lamar Valley. There's elk that are gonna live there, but that's not what we're, keeping the willows down. So let's shift gears now and we're gonna look at kind of the lion in the corner that didn't get any publicity, it didn't get any spotlight. What really happened? It's the bison. That's what happened. Okay, so in 1997, there were 2,000 bison. And so that's 2 years after the introduction of the wolf. So after 97, we saw that elk populations have declined pretty rapidly. And did the wolves kill 15,000 elk? I don't believe they did. I think elk are smart, where they're not going to keep going back and keep getting pounded by these large packs of wolves. They're going to leave. So what happened is a lot of these elk actually headed towards the Madison and they relocated, and others headed north through Gardner and relocated in Paradise Valley, Montana. And then others went south and they stayed away. So this Greater Yellowstone herd shrunk in 8 years by 75%, but I don't think the wolves ate all of them. That's not what happened. But during that time, the bison population skyrocketed all the way up to 6,000 bison. As early as 2008, there were 6,000 bison. Since 2008, there's been about 5,000 bison in Yellowstone Park, and that's over double what there were in 95. And so what's really happening is these bison have kind of filled the void of the grazing and of the landscape of what the elk had back in the early 90s. And unfortunately, the bison are much harsher on the landscape when it comes to erosion and the degradation of stream banks and stream quality, is because anybody that's been around cattle is going to know they have their dust pads, right? And they're digging up. And so you'll go through the Lamar Valley now and you'll see all these like dirt areas, and it's from the bison. And so in my humble opinion, bison cause a much larger factor of erosion on the landscape and degradation of the stream banks and the willows than an elk ever did. But that's the hurdle that we're dealing with now, and what the park is actually dealing with now it's a problem for them because a lot of these bison for the winter, they do move north to Gardner and they do move out to West Yellowstone. And so all of a sudden you have this large amount of bison that are outside park boundaries, but now the stock growers and the cattlemen, because of brucellosis concerns, they're not really tolerating it. And so the park is pressed to manage those numbers and kill those numbers. And so yeah, there's hunts that have been going on over the years. They have the natives that come in, the Indians that come in, and they kill several, and then they do cull some in the park too. And they're upwards of 1,500, pushing 2,000 bison culled every year just to try to keep that population at 5,000 animals and no more than that. Okay, one thing I wanted to touch on with bison and how Mother Nature controls bison, and this is how it varies so much differently to the elk. So grizzly bears and wolves can really target elk, caused a lot of issues, displaced a lot of elk, and preyed upon a lot of calves in the park, which has helped keep the population down. But this is really interesting to me. And what this is the population chart in Yellowstone and the contrast of the park culling and the timeline of that with the reintroduction of the wolf. So you'll see here in 1995, 1996, populations were at all-time highs for bison at the time, and then they culled at all-time highs when the wolf was reintroduced. As elk populations diminished, bison populations continued to explode to a new all-time high, and then cullings once again increased to an all-time high, back down again, and then populations into 2015 once again to a new all-time high, and now here we are at cullings at an all-time high. So you have a bison population that is exploding, but we can see by the numbers that the grizzly bears and wolves aren't effectively managing the bison population as much as what they would like to. And that largely is because bison, number one, are just harder for a predator to take down. I mean, we're talking a 2,000-pound animal that a grizzly bear or a wolf or a pack of wolves has to get after. And now it is possible, and wolves and grizzly bears can kill adult bison, but where bison are superior at protecting their young over elk is they're a little bit more of a defensive animal. So they'll get around their young as a herd, and they'll get those young animals in the middle, and they'll stand their ground. And that's kind of an impenetrable force that a pack of wolves or a grizzly bear has a hard time getting at, compared to a herd of elk with a bunch of calves when they just run, and that's just easy pickings for wolves. So this is a good example of when you have elk off the landscape, you have, once again, much larger amount of carrying capacity for the bison. Their numbers are blowing up. It's hard for those predators to control them, so they have to resort to hunting, to inside the park culling and whatnot to control the numbers. So very interesting about the American bison and how hard it is for large predators to actually control those populations. So that's just kind of a little bit of an idea of what really happened in Yellowstone. And there's some very interesting studies. You can read up on this. This is public information. Colorado State University, a natural resource ecologist, he chimed in on this. This is peer reviewed, that the whole trophic cascade, that the elk and the willows and the beavers debunked it. So it's very interesting to me. But hopefully, maybe you'll learn something. Maybe you look into this. Maybe this will spark some interest to research this a little bit more for you too, because this is very interesting stuff. And once again, I want to reiterate, wolves haven't destroyed the elk numbers and the hunting in Montana, but when left unchecked, there are problems. Remember, the Western hunting and conservation model, everything needs to be included, and that's harvest of all species. And when you leave species out, like the grizzly bear and the wolf for part of the time was left out, then you start having these dramatic waxes and wanes of populations, where if we can manage the grizzly bears and we can manage the wolves and we manage the elk, you can flatten that curve a little bit. You can not have these dramatic dips and dives of populations. So yeah, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to check out my other video when I talk about the Bob Marshall Wilderness, what happened to the elk and the bob, and of course, what happened to the rest of the state. And keep your eye out for additional videos coming up. Subscribe to the channel. Like this video, it really helps me out. And leave me a comment too. Everybody has an opinion about Yellowstone. I didn't cover everything. I'm not the master of Yellowstone, but this is just kind of my account of spending a lot of time in the park and doing a little bit of research over the last 25 years. And I really enjoy this stuff. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one when I talk about we lose half of our permits every 10 years for moose, sheep, and goat in Montana. What's happening there? That's going to be the next video coming out as well. So we'll see you on that one.